Hi, enjoy listening. It was one of those November afternoons that sat quietly between fall and winter, when the trees clung to the last of their golden leaves, and the chill in the air made the pond steam just slightly. Tom Reynolds sat at the far end of Eastlake Park on a worn bench shaded by a half-bare elm. He wore a faded army surplus jacket, 2 sizes too big, and a knit cap someone had handed him last week outside the pharmacy. He watched the ducks in the water, the same ones that had kept him company for the past few weeks. Tom didn't expect anyone to talk to him. Most people didn't. They averted their eyes, walked a little faster, pulled their children closer. It didn't surprise him anymore. That was just how things were. But today was different. "Why are you here?" The voice was small and curious, not judgmental. Tom looked to his right and saw a boy, 6, maybe 7 years old, standing beside the bench. He had messy brown hair and one of those puffy jackets kids always seem to wear this time of year. His cheeks were pink from the cold. "Me?" Tom asked, pointing to himself. The boy nodded. "Yeah. Why are you here every day?" Tom glanced around, half expecting a parent to swoop in and pull the kid away. "I guess it just kind of worked out that way," he said, shrugging. "Things happen." "But that's not right," the boy replied, frowning. "Everyone should have a house, even a little one." Tom smiled. "You might be right about that, buddy." They both turned to look at the pond. A flock of ducks had gathered near the shoreline, quacking loudly and splashing in the shallow water. Tom had learned all their rhythms by now. Which ones fought over food, which ones liked to chase the others, which ones always came last. "My name's Caleb," the boy said, sitting down on the other end of the bench. "Tom," he replied, holding out a gloved hand. Caleb shook it seriously, like a grown-up. The silence returned for a bit, broken only by the wind and the occasional honk from the ducks. "I saw you here before," Caleb said, "with your blanket and the big backpack. You sleep here, right?" Tom hesitated. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want to explain things too deeply. "Yeah, for now," he said quietly. "It's not as bad as it sounds." The boy thought for a second, then asked, "Do you want half my sandwich?" Tom blinked. "You sure?" Caleb pulled a sandwich from the pocket of his jacket, wrapped in foil and slightly squished, and held it out. "I already asked my mum. She said it was okay. I told her it was for you." Tom looked up and spotted her, standing near the playground, holding a book, but clearly watching. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her scrubs peeked out from under a long coat. Her eyes met his for a moment. She gave a small nod. "Tell her thank you," Tom said, accepting the sandwich. Caleb scooted a little closer. "You were in the army, right? I saw your jacket." Tom nodded, taking a careful bite. Peanut butter and jelly. Classic. I think soldiers are cool, Caleb said. Tom chuckled, the first time in a long while. Well, not all of us are cool, but thanks. They sat there a while longer, watching the ducks, eating in silence. Then the sun started to dip behind the trees. I have to go, Caleb said, popping off the bench. We have homework and pizza night. Sounds like a good night, Tom said. See you tomorrow, Caleb asked. Tom hesitated, then smiled. Yeah, kid, I think you will. As the boy ran back to his mother, Tom leaned back on the bench, feeling the last bit of warmth leave the sky. He looked at the half-eaten sandwich in his hand, the pond in front of him, and something inside him shifted. Just a little. Someone had seen him. Not as a problem. Not as a shadow. As a person. The next day, Tom returned to the same bench just after noon. The cold had settled in deeper overnight, and he'd wrapped himself tighter in his blanket and jacket, moving only when the stiffness in his back forced him to stretch. The pond was quieter than usual, with a thin layer of ice forming near the edges. The ducks still paddled in the centre, squawking loudly whenever one of them tried to assert dominance. He wasn't sure why he came back so early. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe it was the unlikely hope that the boy from yesterday, Caleb, would come again. He did. Right after school let out, Tom heard the familiar squeak of snow boots on the paved path. Caleb approached the bench like they'd been meeting there for years. Hey, Tom, the boy said casually, climbing onto the bench with a grunt. Mom let me bring you gloves today. She said yours looked like they were full of holes. Tom looked down at the pair Caleb held out, soft grey gloves with thick lining. He took them slowly, as if they might vanish if he touched them. Tell your mom thank you. Again. She's right over there, Caleb said, pointing to the same spot as yesterday. Meredith stood there in her long coat, scarf tucked under her chin, watching but not intruding. Tom nodded in her direction. This time, she smiled back. A real smile. Caleb opened his backpack and pulled out another sandwich. Turkey and cheese. It's better than yesterday. Tom's stomach ached with gratitude. He didn't remember the last time he'd eaten 2 meals in a row that didn't come from a dumpster or a church basement. You don't have to keep feeding me, you know, Tom said as he took the sandwich. I know, Caleb said simply, but I want to. They ate quietly again. Tom liked that about the kid. He didn't talk just to fill the silence. He watched the ducks, told the occasional story about a kid at school, or asked a thoughtful question. You said you were a soldier, Caleb said. Did you fight in a war? Tom paused, chewing slowly. Yeah, Afghanistan, a few tours. Was it scary? Sometimes. Did you win? That made Tom stop entirely. He looked down at the pond, at the fading light on the water. I'm not sure anybody wins in a war, Caleb. The boy nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than he let on. Tom figured Caleb wouldn't ask more, but then he surprised him again. Is that why you live out here now? Tom sighed, adjusting the gloves the boy had given him. They were warm, really warm. It's kind of a long story, he said. Caleb shrugged. I've got time. Tom looked over to where Meredith stood. She was still there, but now she had her book open, pretending to read. She doesn't mind you talking to me, he asked. She says you seem like a good man who had something bad happen to him, and that you're not dangerous unless someone tries to hurt her son. Caleb grinned. Then she says you might turn into the Hulk. Tom laughed, loud and real, and Caleb laughed with him. It was the first time in months he'd felt anything like joy. You're a good kid, Tom said, and your mum's a good woman. She works at the hospital, Caleb said proudly. She's a nurse in the ER. Sometimes she works nights, and I stay with Mrs. Dupree next door. Your dad around? The boy hesitated. No. He left when I was a baby. Mum says some people aren't meant to stay. But we're doing fine without him. Tom nodded, thoughtful. The kid had grit. Probably from her. Have you tried to get a job? Caleb asked innocently. Maybe my mum could help. Tom didn't answer right away. He remembered walking into a warehouse 2 weeks after getting out, freshly shaved and carrying the paperwork from his parole officer. The hiring manager didn't even look up from her desk. We don't take felons, she'd said flatly, especially not ones with assault charges. He'd walked out without saying a word. You need ID for jobs, he finally told Caleb. Social security card, license, all that. Mine got stolen. It's hard to replace when you don't have a home address or money. That's dumb, Caleb said, frowning. They should help you. Tom smiled again. Yeah, they should. Caleb looked back toward his mother, then back to Tom. Tomorrow, he said, we're bringing you chili. Mum makes the best chili. But you have to promise you'll eat the cornbread too, even if it's crumbly. Tom pretended to think it over. That's a big ask. I'm serious. She gets offended if people don't eat the cornbread. I'll do my best, Tom said, holding up his gloved hand like a scout's oath. Caleb stood and zipped up his backpack. I gotta go. I have spelling words tonight. He turned to leave, then paused. Hey, Tom? Yeah, I'm really glad you're here. Tom didn't know what to say to that. Not really. So he just said, me too, kid. He sat there a long time after Caleb left. The sandwich wrapper was tucked into his bag, the gloves snug on his hands. For the first time in what felt like forever, Tom didn't feel completely alone. That night, Tom lay curled beneath his tarp shelter behind a shuttered maintenance building at the edge of the park. The bench by the pond was where he spent his days, but this was his bedroom, as he half-joked to himself. Sheltered from the wind, hidden from security patrols, dry if it didn't rain sideways. He stared up at the stars beyond the tree branches, trying not to think. But Caleb's questions lingered, and so did the old ghosts. Tom hadn't always been like this, living under the radar, washing his clothes in public bathrooms, hoping to scrounge enough from odd jobs to buy food. 3 years ago, He'd had a life. Back then, Staff Sergeant Thomas Reynolds was a decorated Army combat engineer with over a decade of service and a spotless record. He'd signed up right after high school, eager to leave behind his sleepy Ohio hometown. He served 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He saw things he couldn't forget and did things he didn't like to remember. But he believed in the mission. He believed in doing good. On his last deployment, he narrowly survived an IED blast that killed 2 of his squad members. He came home with shrapnel in his leg and an honorable discharge in his future. After a brief recovery, he settled in North Carolina, close to Fort Bragg, where he planned to finish out his career training new recruits. He liked structure. He liked order. He liked having a purpose. That all ended the day he walked out of a gas station and saw a man grabbing a woman by the hair and dragging her toward a black SUV. She screamed. People scattered. No one stepped in. Tom did. The man was younger, bigger, but Tom was trained. The fight was brief, but brutal. He didn't hold back. He couldn't. He disarmed him, pinned him, called 911. By the time police arrived, the guy was unconscious and bleeding. And then everything went sideways. The woman, shaken, bruised, refused to press charges. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said Tom had overreacted. The man's name was Connor Brooks. His father was retired Major General William Brooks, who had deep connections across the military and law enforcement. Within days, Tom was suspended from his role. 2 weeks later, he was dishonorably discharged. Assault charges followed. Then a court date. Then jail. His public defender was a joke. His character witnesses were blocked. The woman he tried to help testified that Tom had attacked them unprovoked. 3 years. He served 26 months and walked out with nothing but the clothes on his back and a record that erased all his service. After that, Tom tried to get his life together. He reached out to the VA. They said they needed proof of honorable discharge to qualify him for benefits. He called his old unit. No one returned his calls. He couch surfed for a month. When the friend he was staying with moved for a job, Tom had nowhere to go. He pawned his last watch for cash, rented a motel room for 2 nights, and tried applying for jobs. Everywhere he went, they asked the same thing. Any felony convictions? He tried to be honest, tried to explain. The HR rep at a trucking company had said it to his face. You're a liability. If someone like you got fired and locked up, there's got to be more to the story. After that, something broke in him. He stopped trying, drifted. At first, he avoided shelters. They were crowded, sometimes dangerous, and never felt safe. He camped in parks, did yard work when he could, helped elderly homeowners shovel snow or haul firewood in exchange for sandwiches or $5 bills. But he didn't beg. He never begged. He still carried himself with a soldier's bearing. Back straight, shoulders squared, head up. But the eyes, his eyes had changed. Then 3 weeks ago, someone stole his backpack while he slept in a church vestibule. It had everything: his military ID, a copy of his birth certificate, even the letter from his parole officer confirming he'd completed all requirements. Gone. He was back to zero. The next morning, he woke early. The air was crisp, and his tarp was coated in frost. He washed his face with water from the park spigot, changed his socks, and headed toward the bench. And there they were. Caleb waved both arms like he was directing a plane on the tarmac. Meredith walked behind him, holding a thermos and a paper bag. She smiled, but it was guarded, protective. "Good morning," she said, approaching. "Hope you're hungry." "You brought chili?" he asked, smiling. "Of course, with cornbread." She handed him the bag and the thermos. "And 2 napkins this time. Caleb says you're a messy eater." "Hey," Tom laughed. "That's slander." They sat together for a while. Caleb told him about spelling tests and a dodgeball incident at recess. Meredith mostly listened, occasionally chiming in. Then, as Caleb chased squirrels nearby, Meredith leaned in slightly. "Tom, I know we don't know each other well, but I want to ask, have you ever tried getting your records fixed?" He shook his head. "I don't have the paperwork, and even if I did, I'm not sure anyone would listen. Once you're labeled a felon, that's all." "But that's not fair." "No, it's not," he says softly. "But that doesn't really matter." Meredith paused, watching Caleb for a moment. "There's a guy I know, a patient. He was Army too, retired colonel, I think. He runs this support network for vets, especially guys who fell through the cracks. You should meet him." Tom looked away. "I don't want a handout." "This isn't a handout," she said. "It's a second chance." He didn't respond. She stood up and reached into her coat, pulling out a scrap of paper. "I'll just leave his name and address here, in case you change your mind." Tom took the paper, but didn't look at it. As they left, Caleb shouted, "See you tomorrow!" And Tom, against every voice in his head telling him not to get attached, found himself saying, "Yeah, you will." He tucked the note into his coat pocket, the chili warming his hands. He hadn't believed in second chances for a long time. But maybe it was time to try. Tom hadn't slept much the night before, not from cold or hunger, though those were familiar enough, but because he kept staring at the slip of paper Meredith had given him. The name on it was Colonel Richard Ellsworth, retired, along with an address for the local VA outreach center and a simple message in Meredith's handwriting. "Tell him I sent you." But before he could bring himself to visit the colonel, Tom decided he had to try one last thing, going straight to the top. The idea came to him late that night, under his tarp, watching his breath fog in the air. Meredith had said something days earlier, almost offhandedly. "You know, If someone just explained your story to the mayor, he might actually help. Maybe it was naive, but what did he have to lose? By morning, Tom had made up his mind. He washed again at the park spigot, using a sliver of soap wrapped in plastic and an old t-shirt to scrub his face and neck. He rinsed out his socks, hung them to dry while he did some push-ups to warm his body, and tried to flatten his wiry brown hair using the reflection in a puddle. He even found his old dog tags and tucked them under his shirt. He wasn't going in as a beggar. He was going in as a soldier. The town's city hall was a 3-story brick building just off Main Street. Modest, but respectable. Flags flapped above the front steps. A bronze plaque near the door listed the names of mayors past and present. Tom paused for a moment to steady himself, adjusted the strap on his backpack, and walked up the steps. Inside, he found a clean, white-walled lobby. The floor tiles gleamed. A receptionist's desk sat unattended, off to the left. He heard the high-pitched giggle of someone talking on the phone behind a cracked office door. Tom cleared his throat. "Excuse me?" No answer. He moved cautiously down the hall, spotting a sign that read, "Mayor's Office, 2nd floor." The elevator was out of service, so he took the stairs. When he reached the 2nd floor, he followed another sign to a large double door with brass handles. He hesitated only a moment, then knocked. A muffled voice called out, "Yeah?" Tom opened the door. The mayor, a man in his mid-50s with silvering hair and a stiff navy blue suit, looked up from a stack of papers. His expression tightened the moment he laid eyes on Tom. "Who are you?" he asked sharply. "My name's Tom Reynolds, sir. I served in the army for—" "Where's security?" the mayor snapped, rising from his chair. "Who let you in here?" "No one. I came to ask for help." "From me?" "Yes, sir. I've been trying to fix my records. I was wrongly charged after defending a woman." "Wait," the mayor said, voice booming now. "You're that guy? The vet who—" Tom clenched his jaw. That's not what happened. "Security!" the mayor barked, opening the door and yelling down the hall. "Now!" Tom tried again. "I just need help replacing my documents. I'm not asking for a handout, just a chance to—" But 2 large security guards were already rushing up the stairs. The mayor pointed at Tom like he was vermin. "Get him out of here!" They grabbed Tom by the arms, rougher than necessary, and started dragging him back down the hallway. "Sir, please," Tom said, twisting his body. "Just listen to the full story." "Don't come back here," the mayor growled. "We don't have time for cons and criminals." The double doors slammed behind him. Tom sat on the curb outside City Hall for a long time. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at the sidewalk, hands trembling, heart pounding, not from fear or sadness, but from humiliation. He had walked in with his head held high. Now, he couldn't even look people in the eye. He walked back to the park in silence. When Caleb and Meredith showed up later that afternoon, Tom was sitting motionless on the bench, staring at the frozen pond. Tom! Caleb waved, bounding up the path with a thermos in his hand. Meredith followed, holding 2 grocery bags. We brought chili again, this time with cheddar on top. Tom didn't turn. Meredith's smile faded as she reached the bench. You didn't go, did you? I went, Tom said quietly. I got thrown out. She sat beside him. Caleb, sensing the mood, wandered over to the edge of the pond to throw crumbs to the ducks. I told you it was a bad idea, Tom muttered, voice hollow. I shouldn't have listened. That guy didn't even hear my name before calling security. Meredith looked at him with quiet resolve. So that's it. You're just going to give up. What else am I supposed to do? You can fight. I already did fight. You know where that got me? Jail. Homeless. Shoved out the door by people in suits. Then try a different kind of fight, she said. Come with me to the outreach center. Talk to Colonel Ellsworth. I know him. He listens, and he has pull. Tom let out a bitter laugh. What, because he used to wear the same uniform I did? No, Meredith said, standing now. Because he hasn't forgotten what that uniform means. Tom didn't respond. Meredith stepped closer and softened her voice. You are a soldier, Tom. Not just a fighter, a protector. You defended someone when no one else would. You paid a price, but that doesn't mean you stop showing up. Tom looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't afraid of him. She believed in him. She turned to Caleb. Come on, kiddo. We've got work to do. Tom will let us know when he's ready. Caleb jogged over and handed Tom the thermos. Just in case, he said. Then they walked away. Tom stared down at the steaming chili in his hands. He was tired of running. Tired of shame. Maybe it was time to stand up again. He pulled out the slip of paper and read the name. Colonel Richard Ellsworth, retired. Then he stood. Tom had walked past the VA Outreach Center a dozen times before. It sat tucked between an old pharmacy and a boarded-up laundromat, the kind of place people pretended not to see. There were no big signs, no flags, just a plain blue door and a small brass plate that read, Veterans Resource and Outreach, Office of Colonel R. Ellsworth, retired. The first time Tom saw it, he kept walking. That was months ago. This time, he didn't. He adjusted his coat, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside. The air inside the outreach center was warm and smelled faintly of old books and burnt coffee. The front room looked like a converted living room. Scuffed hardwood floors, a couple of second-hand couches, a bookshelf crammed with binders, and a rack of donated coats near the door. A young woman in a Red Sox hoodie sat behind a desk, typing. She glanced up. Can I help you? Tom hesitated. I was told to ask for Colonel Ellsworth. Meredith Bell sent me. The woman smiled. You're Tom? He nodded, wary. Yeah, Meredith called ahead. Said you might come by. Hang tight. He's just finishing a meeting. She stood, walked to a door at the back, knocked twice, and disappeared behind it. A moment later, it opened again, and out stepped the colonel. Colonel Richard Ellsworth was tall, clean-shaven, and white-haired. He moved like a man who still did morning PT, though his face was lined with age and long days. He wore jeans and a pressed flannel shirt, but everything about his posture screamed career officer. He looked at Tom the way officers look at soldiers, directly, without flinching. "You Reynolds?" "Yes, sir." "Come on back." Tom followed him into the office, trying not to second-guess himself. The colonel shut the door and gestured for Tom to sit in a battered leather chair across from his desk. Then he sat down, folded his hands, and looked at him. "I read your file," Ellsworth said. "Meredith forwarded me a write-up she found through her hospital network. You were dishonorably discharged for assault on a civilian. Pleaded out, served time, parole completed." "That's right." Ellsworth nodded once. "Why'd you come here?" Tom's throat felt tight. "Because someone finally believed me, and because I'm tired of being invisible." The colonel sat back in his chair. "Start from the beginning. Don't skip anything." So Tom told him. He told him about that day at the gas station, the girl screaming, the fight, the arrest, about the trial and how quickly it all unraveled, about the silence from his former command, the lost paperwork, the VA turning him away. He told him about the shelters, the park bench, and how every job application ended with a door slammed in his face. Ellsworth didn't interrupt once. When Tom finally stopped, the colonel was silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward and pulled open a drawer. He laid 2 forms on the desk and slid them across. "You're going to file for a DD-293 and a DD-149. Requests to correct military records and discharge status. I'll help you write the statement." Tom stared at the forms. "You think it'll actually work?" "I've seen worse situations overturned, and I've got people still inside the system. We'll make noise until someone listens." Tom blinked hard. "Why would you help me?" Ellsworth's eyes softened. "Because I've seen what this country does to the people it forgets. And because I remember what it's like to be young, to do the right thing and get punished for it." He paused. "And because I have a son buried at Arlington who served with honor, and he'd want me to help a man like you." Tom swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thank you, sir. You're not in uniform anymore, Reynolds. Call me Rick." The next few days moved quickly. Tom returned every morning to fill out paperwork. Rick gave him bus fare to get to the Social Security office and DMV. They filed for replacements of his stolen documents. Rick introduced him to a pro bono lawyer who specialized in military discharge upgrades. The lawyer was blunt but thorough. "You've got a hell of a case," she said. "We'll go after the wrongful discharge. And if we get that reversed, we can get your VA benefits reinstated. That's healthcare, housing, a job path." Tom was stunned. "You really think it's possible?" She smiled. "I think it's time someone fought for you." Each night, Tom returned to his tarp shelter, but something had changed. He stood taller, walked with more purpose. The shame wasn't gone, but it wasn't everything anymore. He even bought a notebook from the dollar store and started writing. Nothing grand, just thoughts, bits of memory, letters he'd never send. Something to keep his mind steady. And every afternoon, like clockwork, Caleb and Meredith showed up at the bench by the pond. Meredith didn't pry. She just brought food and asked how things were going. Caleb didn't care about court filings or paperwork. He just wanted to know if Tom had ever driven a tank. He hadn't. But he'd once helped tow one out of a mudslide. One evening, after they'd shared dinner, Meredith reached into her bag and pulled out a set of clean clothes. Pants, a button-down shirt, socks still folded from the package. "I thought you might need these for your meeting next week," she said. Tom held the clothes, unsure what to say. "You're not a project, Tom," she added gently. "You're a person. You deserve better than how they left you." He looked at her for the first time in a long while, felt the sting of hope. "Thank you," he whispered. The next morning he put on the new clothes. They didn't quite fit right, but they were warm, clean, and didn't smell like the streets. He washed up at the community centre and walked back to the outreach office. Rick was waiting. "You ready to be heard?" he asked. Tom nodded. Together they stepped inside to begin filing the formal appeal. This time Tom wasn't alone. The official paperwork was sent out on a Tuesday morning. Copies of everything. The appeal to upgrade Tom's discharge status, his request for a review of the conviction, letters of support from both Colonel Ellsworth and Meredith, even a notarized affidavit from the lawyer. Rick gave the envelope a firm pat before handing it to the courier. "Now we wait." Tom nodded. Waiting had become second nature to him. But this time, waiting felt different. It didn't feel like nothing. It felt like something just might happen. To keep busy, Tom began volunteering around the outreach centre. He swept floors, organised supply shelves, sorted donated coats by size. Rick didn't say it out loud, but Tom could tell. He was testing him, seeing if he showed up on time, if he kept his word, if he could be counted on. Tom passed that test without trying. He liked having a purpose, however small. One morning, Rick called him into the back room. A quiet space with a desk, a landline phone, and a coffee pot that had seen better days. "I got a call from the DMV," Rick said. "Your replacement ID's ready. Should be here by Friday. Same with your social security card." Tom blinked. "Seriously?" Rick smiled. "You're officially a human being again." "Paperwork and..." Tom chuckled, then grew quiet. "It's been so long since I had anything with my name on it." Rick leaned forward. "Get used to it. This is just the beginning." Later that day, Meredith and Caleb met him at the park bench. It was warmer now, late March, and the pond had started to thaw. Ducks clustered near the edges again, quacking and waddling through the slush. Caleb, unusually serious, carried something wrapped in newspaper. "I made you something," he said, climbing onto the bench beside Tom. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You made something?" "Yup, in school. Miss Jordan said we could make anything out of clay, so I made you this." He unwrapped it carefully and held out a small, lumpy object. A duck, about the size of a baseball. The wings were uneven. The beak was crooked, but its little clay eyes looked up at Tom like it understood him perfectly. Tom stared at it. "It's not perfect," Caleb said quickly, "but I made it for you because you always sit here and feed the ducks. I thought maybe, if you ever leave the park, you could still have one with you." Tom didn't speak. His hands trembled slightly as he took the duck. "Thanks, kid," he whispered. Caleb beamed. Meredith, quiet beside them, looked away discreetly, her eyes damp. That night, Tom returned to his tarp shelter, but he didn't stay there. Instead, he walked back to the outreach center and showed Rick the duck. "I think I'm ready," he said. Rick raised a brow. "Ready for what?" "To stop living like I'm waiting for the past to catch me." Rick nodded slowly, then said, "Come back tomorrow. I've got something for you." The next morning, Rick handed him a piece of paper with an address scrawled in blocky handwriting. "Old friend of mine runs a transitional housing program just outside town. Good place. Shared rooms, hot meals, privacy. Told him about you. He's got a spot open." Tom stared at the address. "You don't have to live out here anymore," Rick said. "Not unless you want to." Tom felt his throat close again. He wasn't used to generosity, but he was learning how to accept it. The place was modest, a converted farmhouse with a big porch and 6 small bedrooms upstairs. Tom met the director, a woman named Clara, who welcomed him like she already knew his story without needing to hear it. His new room had a bed, a desk, a closet, and for the first time in years, a door that locked from the inside. Tom unpacked his entire life in 4 minutes. He had 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, a notebook, and Caleb's clay duck. He set the duck on the windowsill. It looked out toward the trees, as if watching for the real ones. A week later, he got a call from the lawyer. "The Army Discharge Review Board accepted your case for review," she said. "That doesn't guarantee an upgrade, but it means they found it credible enough to investigate." Tom gripped the phone tightly. "What happens now?" "They'll contact witnesses, reread your court records, and they'll request a statement from you directly. We'll help you write that." "I've already written something," he said quietly. There was a pause. "You have?" He nodded, though she couldn't see. "Yeah, I've been working on it in my notebook. Just didn't know what it was for until now." She sounded pleased. "Then let's build it into your appeal. They'll want to hear your voice." The next Sunday, Tom returned to the park bench. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because it had become a kind of ritual. A place of quiet and beginnings. Caleb was already there, tossing crumbs to the ducks. Tom sat beside him. "You know," Caleb said, "when my dad left, I thought maybe he'd come back one day. But he didn't. So I started pretending other people were my dad instead. Like teachers, or mailmen, or you. Tom looked at him, startled. But then I stopped pretending, Caleb said. Because I don't need a dad. I've got a you. Tom wasn't sure what to say to that. But he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pack of crackers he'd saved, and handed them over. They fed the ducks in silence, side by side, the wind rippling across the pond. By mid-April, the first signs of real spring touched the edges of the city. Tom could feel it in the warmth that lingered longer each day, in the green fuzz growing over the trees, in the hum of lawnmowers and early morning joggers. But the change in the air wasn't just the season. Something inside him had shifted too. He'd been at the transitional housing for almost 3 weeks. He made his bed every morning. He showed up at the outreach centre on time. He kept a small notepad in his back pocket and jotted down to-do lists like it mattered what he did with each day. Because it did. And then the call came. The hearing's been scheduled, the lawyer said. 3 weeks from today. Video conference with the Army Discharge Review Board. You'll testify. So will I. Colonel Ellsworth, too. Tom sat quietly on the end of the bed, his phone pressed to his ear. I'll help you prepare, she added. They'll ask hard questions, but the board wants to understand you, not break you. He nodded. I've been waiting a long time to tell them. I know. The next 2 weeks were full of practice. Mock hearings, prepared statements, strategy sessions. Meredith sat in on one, at Tom's invitation. He wanted someone who had seen the man he was now, not just the soldier he had been. You don't owe them perfection, she told him gently after one rehearsal. You just owe them the truth. Tom tried to remember that. He rewrote his testimony 6 times. The final version wasn't polished, it was raw. But it was honest. The night before the hearing, Tom couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his small room, watching shadows stretch across the yard. The clay duck sat on the sill, watching with him. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Meredith. You've already survived the worst part. Tomorrow is just the start of what's next. I believe in you. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then he turned to the duck. Let's try this one more time. The morning of the hearing, Tom wore the same shirt Meredith had given him. It fit better now. He'd put on a little weight, gotten a little steadier in his stride. He ran a hand through his hair, checked his reflection, then grabbed his notebook and left. Rick drove him to the outreach office, where they'd set up the video call in a private room. You ready? Rick asked. No, Tom said truthfully. But I'm here. Rick smiled. That's good enough. The board members appeared one by one on the screen. 3 officers in crisp uniforms, seated behind an official seal. They greeted Tom politely, then moved straight into the hearing. It started with the facts. His record, his deployment, his conviction. Then the questions came. Why did you choose to intervene that day? What would you have done differently, if anything? Can you explain your behavior after your release from prison? Tom answered as best he could. Calm, clear, unflinching. I didn't go looking for a fight, he said, but I heard her screaming, and I didn't think. I just acted. I was trained to protect people. That's what I did. And after? One officer pressed. I was angry, Tom admitted, and ashamed. Not for what I did, but for how I was abandoned. I lost everything in a day. So I shut down. I stopped expecting anything from anyone. There was silence after that. Then it was Colonel Ellsworth's turn. He sat tall, speaking with the kind of authority that made people listen. I reviewed Mr. Reynolds' full file, Rick said. The civilian who accused him never appeared in court again. The so-called victim had prior arrests for domestic violence. The military command failed to provide proper representation during discharge proceedings. That is unacceptable. He paused. But more importantly, I've gotten to know Mr. Reynolds personally. He has shown integrity, humility, and commitment. He belongs back among those who served with honor. The board members conferred briefly, then invited Tom to deliver his closing remarks. He opened his notebook. I've spent years feeling like I didn't exist. Like one bad moment erased everything good I'd ever done. I let that belief live inside me for too long. He looked into the webcam. But I've changed. I've been helped, believed in, challenged. And now I want to build something better. For myself. For others like me. I just want a chance to stand on solid ground again. There was a long silence. Then the screen blinked off. That's it, Tom asked, blinking at the empty screen. For now, Rick said. They'll notify us in writing once they decide. How long? A few weeks, maybe longer. Tom sat back in the chair, breathless. Rick clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, Reynolds. Tom nodded slowly. And for the first time, he felt like maybe he believed it. He walked back to the pond that afternoon. It was sunny, the grass finally green again. Caleb sat on the bench, swinging his legs. Tom joined him without a word. Caleb looked at him. Did you win? I don't know yet. Caleb nodded. Well, if you don't, just try again. Tom smiled. That simple, huh? Yeah, ducks don't give up when the pond freezes. They just wait. Tom let out a laugh, surprised by how deeply that landed. Smart ducks, he said. Tom had never realized how long a few weeks could feel. After the hearing, life settled back into its quiet rhythm. Mornings at the shelter, afternoons volunteering, the occasional dinner with Meredith and Caleb, walks by the pond. But underneath it all was a slow, relentless hum of waiting, like standing in the dark with your hand on a light switch, hoping someone flips it. Each day he checked the mailbox at the transitional house. Nothing. 3 weeks passed, then 4. And then, on a Thursday morning in early May, Clara knocked on his door. She had a manila envelope in her hand. "It came," she said gently. Tom stood frozen. "You sure?" She nodded. "Return address says Department of the Army." He took it from her slowly, like it might dissolve if he moved too fast. "Thanks," he whispered. He didn't open it right away. He sat on the edge of his bed, envelope in hand, staring out the window where the clay duck still stood on the sill. The world outside was full of life. Birds chirping, wind in the trees, a child's laugh echoing somewhere down the street. Finally, he slit the envelope open. He read the first line once, then again, and again. After a full review of the evidence and testimony provided, the board has voted to upgrade your discharge status to general under honorable conditions. Tom exhaled, slow, heavy, like something had been sitting on his chest for years and finally lifted. Further down, in official language, it stated the original discharge had failed to consider mitigating factors. The board acknowledged procedural shortcomings. His record, once marred by a dishonorable stamp, would now reflect something closer to the truth. Not perfect, but closer. Tom sat back, eyes closed. He wasn't erased anymore. He walked to the park that afternoon. He didn't plan to. His feet just took him there. Meredith and Caleb were already on the bench, sharing a bag of sunflower seeds. She looked up as he approached. "Tom?" He didn't speak, just held out the letter. She took it, scanning quickly. Her eyes widened. "You got it?" He nodded. "They changed it," she whispered. Caleb looked between them. "Changed what?" Tom crouched beside him. "Remember that story I told you? About the army saying I didn't belong anymore?" Caleb nodded. "Well," Tom said, "they took it back." Caleb blinked. "So now they say you do belong?" "Pretty much." The boy grinned. "Told you ducks don't give up." Tom stayed for dinner that night. Meredith made roast chicken and potatoes. Caleb built a Lego duck on the table while they ate. The kitchen was small but warm, lived in, kind. After the meal, Tom helped with the dishes. As he handed Meredith a clean plate, she looked up at him. "What now?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Now, I think I try to live like someone who got a second chance." She nodded. "And do you know how to do that?" "Not yet," he admitted, "but I know who I want to be around while I figure it out." Meredith's eyes softened. "We're not going anywhere." That weekend, Tom and Rick met with a non-profit director who ran job training for veterans. They looked over Tom's new discharge paperwork. Rick vouched for him, and just like that, Tom was accepted into a program for peer mentors. People who had walked the road, fallen off it, and learned how to climb back on. "They'll pay you to train first," the director said. "If it's a good fit, we move you to part-time, then full." Tom shook his hand. "Thank you." "No," the man said. "Thank you. We need more people like you, the real ones." Later that night, Tom stood in front of a mirror. He didn't look different, but something in his face had changed. Less guarded, less hollow. He pulled out his notebook, the one he used to write his testimony, and began a new page. At the top, he wrote, "Things worth keeping." Underneath, he listed the clay duck, Caleb's laugh, Meredith's trust, clean socks, second chances, a name that means something again. He paused, then added, the bench by the pond. 1 year later, almost to the day, Tom stood at the edge of the same pond where he'd once sat with a torn jacket, a bruised past, and nowhere to go. Now he wore clean jeans, a crisp blue shirt, and a lanyard with a badge that read, Tom Reynolds, Veteran Peer Mentor, New Hope Network. He was early. Caleb and Meredith weren't due for another half hour. The sun shimmered across the pond's surface, ducks gliding lazily, as if the world had never been unkind. Tom reached into his backpack and pulled out a small box. Inside was the same clay duck Caleb had given him. He'd kept it all this time, through the hearing, the housing, the jobs, the nights when he still sometimes slinched awake from dreams of prison bars and dishonorable stamps. He walked to a small wooden post near the pond's edge. On it was a newly installed plaque, in honor of new beginnings, dedicated to the veterans who still fight battles no one sees. Below that, a small shelf, just wide enough for one small duck. Tom set it there carefully, then stepped back. A child's voice cut through the air. "There he is!" Caleb ran up the path, slightly taller, a little faster. Meredith followed, her hand resting on her belly. She was 6 months pregnant now. Tom still wasn't used to the word dad when Caleb said it, but he was learning to wear it like a worn jacket that would soon fit just right. "Hey, champ," he said, catching the boy in a quick hug. "You're early." Caleb pointed to the shelf. "Is that my duck?" Tom grinned. "Thought it deserved a place here." Meredith came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "It's perfect." Later, they sat on the bench, the same one where it all began. They shared crackers with the ducks. Caleb told stories about school. Meredith rested her head on Tom's shoulder and closed her eyes. Tom watched the water, the breeze, the world. "You know," he said softly, "a year ago, I thought I'd lost everything." "You hadn't," Meredith whispered. "I know that now." He looked at her, then down at the curve of her stomach. "Do we know yet?" he asked. She smiled. "Boy," Caleb whooped. "Yes, I'm still the oldest." Tom laughed, full and real. He hadn't planned to stay in this town. Hadn't expected to be loved again. Hadn't imagined he'd walk into City Hall one day as a man who belonged again. But here he was. He stood up and stretched. "I have a surprise." He pulled a covered cage from under a blanket in the stroller they'd brought. Inside, a green parrot blinked up at them, cocking its head. "Meet Sarge," Tom said. "Figured it was time we added someone new to the crew." Meredith's eyes lit up. "You remembered?" "Took some convincing, but the rescue shelter finally said yes. Apparently, he only swears sometimes." Caleb burst out laughing. "Cool!" The parrot let out a raspy squawk. "You bet you're—" Tom clapped the cage shut. "Mostly well behaved." As the sun dipped low, they packed up their things and walked slowly home, hand in hand, Duck trailing behind in its place of honor. The pond was still, the bench empty again, the world quiet. But Tom knew one thing deep in his bones. You don't come back from everything, but you can still come back. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find where the ducks gather, and you stay. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.